Hello learners, we are talking on the MOOC course on life skills for graduate. This is the module 3 dealing with effective communication. As we had already talked in the previous modules that for the 21st century learners or the individuals who are undergraduate, effective communication is very important. This lecture 1 will deal with what is communication, its meaning and types, and then we will gradually come to effective communication, its principles, and also what should be required in classroom communication for undergraduates. Communication, as we know, is sharing of thoughts, feelings, opinions, ideas, information, belief, or whatever one has with himself with or herself with others. The word communication comes from the Latin word communis, which means to make common, that is, to make or share or exchange or send or transmit, write, relate, and make it common with others. Etymologically, if you look at the word communis, it comes from either communicare or Latin word communicare, which means to impart or to participate. So, if you mix these two words, communicare and communis, it means that we have to share, exchange ideas, information, beliefs with two or more people who participate into it. Therefore, communication is a process where two or more people participate together to share ideas, share belief, share information, share their information, share their own knowledge with each other. If we see what communication does, we have to see that from itself when we are saying that communication is a process, it's a dynamic process between two or more individuals who are sharing common ideas, common information, common belief by each other so that they both have the same level of information, belief, knowledge, etc. with them. The main function of communication is therefore giving information or sharing information. Communication refers to collective storage and dissemination of information for wider utilization by people. In this way, it enables people to participate and take intelligent decisions on issues related to social relevance, related to economic importance, related to their own day-to-day activities. Another important function of communication is education. That is, while we are sharing information, we are trying to educate or trying to bring out from within the capabilities in an individual. Education means dissemination of information that enhances the individual's intellectual development and helps one to acquire the skills and aptitude required to become a productive member of the society. In this way, communication and education are two sides of the same coin. The quality of education depends on the quality of communication between society and its members. Another very important function of communication is entertainment. That is, we have to see that we are able to entertain people, make them enjoy their life in different way, because enjoyment is very important for healthy living. Entertainment and recreation are important for making individuals and society happy. People find enjoyment and entertainment through various communication activities such as dance, drama, chatting, sharing ideas, talks, debate. These means of communication provide both personal and collective entertainment or enjoyment. It can be mass entertainment when we are using the mass media. Socialization is another function of communication. While we are talking of information, education, entertainment, we are saying that communication helps individuals to become active members of the society, to which they belong. People learn social norms in order to live cohesively when they communicate or share their ideas, beliefs, feelings with each other. Having access to a variety of information, individuals get opportunity to understand each other and appreciate others people's feelings, emotions, ideas and expectation in a social setting, and in that way their socialization becomes an important part in the society, leading to more social activities by means of communication. Motivation to be an important member of society is another part of communication or another important contribution of communication. Motivation of individuals, members of society to play an important role for the development of the society and in turn their own development is an important aspect of communication. Communication fosters the individuals and community activities and motivates people to meet the goals which have been mutually agreed upon. Well-informed individuals take initiative of social welfare and therefore the purpose of their being motivated to help others increases if they are able to communicate well. Now, to understand the process of communication, we have to see what are the various types of communication which occur. Communication can be verbal or non-verbal. When we talk of verbal communication, we refer to the type of communication where we are either writing, reading, where we are using some scripts, some letters or some form of written material or language where we are using. So, verbal communication can be both oral and written. When we are using some language and communicating in terms of speaking, listening, then it is verbal communication. When we are communicating by reading, writing, then it is the written communication because something has been written and that a person has to read and then probably express his ideas in a written form. For verbal communication, as already explained, we require a language and a script. There is another very important type of communication, that is the non-verbal communication. Our gestures, our movements, our eye contact, our postures are very important form of communication. Many times, more than the verbal communication, non-verbal communication gives the feeling or acceptance to others when we are conveying some ideas. Suppose we are saying welcome. If that welcome is with a smile, welcome, then it looks nice. But if that welcome is welcome, then the person who's being welcomed does not feel welcome. So your gestures, your facial expressions, your hand movements, your postures. Also in interviews, it is said that how you are sitting is very important. So as I was saying, your gestures, your hand movements, your facial expressions, your postures are very important when you are communicating with a person. It may require a language, it may not require a language. We have seen that there were silent movies where people could just express the whole lot of situation with their movements, only with their facial expressions, with their hand movements, with their body language. Mimes are a very important form of non-verbal communication where the whole idea is conveyed without actually speaking a word. Another types of communication can be formal and informal communication. When we are in an office setting or an institutional setting or a workplace setting, then our communication is formal. We have certain sets of rules which we have to follow in the formal communication. Although there is a lot of grapevine communication which is there is a jury's window which says that what formal communication, what is visible and what is not visible is also important. Then there is escalators matrix which is there when you're talking in people talk in companies with while they are moving around. So those are there. But a formal communication is where when you are officially or formally communicating with your seniors, with your peers, with your office persons in a set of bound rules or regulations. Informal communication is where you are communicating without certain set of formal guidelines which are there. So informal communication helps you to be more open to situations where the formal communication puts you a timeline, or it puts you a barrier or a window which you have to communicate into. So both informal and formal communication are important for a person in his daily life or in his day-to-day activities. If after seeing this, we also have to see what are the various components of communication. If you see the communication process, actually when we are describing communication, we also say that it is a cyclic process where we have to deal with the information which goes from one person to another, and then there has to be again that information has to be cycled, or a feedback has to be given to the person who had encoded or decided that information. So while we are talking of communication components, we talk of the source who is the sender, and we talk of a receiver who is the recipient in the communication process. Now this sender and receiver, the sender may be one, the receiver may be many. Even the senders can be many and the receiver can be one. We have different ways where we see that the source can be multiple and the recipient can be one, or the vice versa is also true. Now the sender or the source or the encoder encodes the message which is transferred by a medium to the recipient or the receiver or the respondent, who then decodes that message and again provides a feedback by again encoding it and transferring it in form of message to a sender. So this is a cyclic process of communication cycle. Now the message can be verbal, it can be a symbol, it can be gestural, and it can be transferred to various medias of communication which are there. If you look to communication medias, generally the Edgar Dale cone of experience is referred to the various medias which are used in the communication process. It can be a direct talk which can be written in a form of chalkboard work, it can be written in form of a chart work, it can be a PowerPoint, it can be a pamphlet, it can be a hoarding where the things are written. So this can be a media, it can be a projective media, it can be traditional media, it can be electronic media. Today we communicate a lot by e-media. We have the Facebooks, we have the WhatsApp, while we are we have the emails by which we are communicating our ideas, our feelings, our informations to others. So today the social media is one of the very important media of communication. People are conveying their messages, their information very quickly by use of this e-media or electronic media. If you go back to traditional medias, we remember that there were pigeons who used to carry information or letters from one place to another. There used to be drum beats which used to send information in types of codes which was received. We had the Morse code where the lightning, the light from the ships was used as a communication symbol to others. So we have different medias of communication depending upon the situation where you are and which place you are. If it is an informal setting, then a mode of media of communication will be different. If it is a formal setting, then media of communication will be different. So the message has to be transferred into that media and conveyed to the recipient. The recipient receives the message and he decodes it, and again he has to put his feedback whether he has understood or not understood, because again and again I am saying communication is a cyclic process where feedback has a very important contribution into whole efficient or effective communication. Anything which breaks this communication cycle leads to breakage of this effective communication. So in effective communication, when we see, all these components have to be arranged in a very proper manner and there has to be no breakage in any one of them. The recipient should receive the message properly through a proper media. The source should be able to encode the message properly and send it through proper media, and again the recipient has to transfer the message back through proper media. Anything which leads to break in this leads to disruption in the communication, which may be a noise, it can be a technical barrier, and therefore it stops the effective communication. Effective communication is when we are able to share or convey the idea, information, knowledge as was conceived or as was encoded by the sender. Any communication, if we see, is never 100% because some information is always lost. There can be example, the Chinese whisper which we play. One person says a line and the whole chain reads that line, and when you come to the final receiver or the final person in that chain, you see your message has somehow changed. Sometime it may change totally, sometime it may change a bit of it. So effective communication is when information and intention and emotions are exchanged as they were thought to be. It involves clearly transmitting a message and receiving acknowledgement that the message has been received and understood as was intended by the source to the receiver. So the person who is coining the message, as we see many times, we have movies, we have dramas where the producer or the maker or the director wanted to convey something else, but the message was conveyed in some other form, and therefore the whole concept of the drama or the movie or the play changes. So that is very important. Sometimes we write something, the novel has been written with some other aspect in mind, and when it is read by the readers, then they get some other information into it. Many times this happen into social media messages also. The person who is actually saying something, it is interpreted in a very different way. So this is what requires effective communication, that you should say, you should convey the message as you mean, because there may be various forms how people receive this message. Effective communication therefore means providing acknowledgement to others that ensures that they feel heard and understood at the same time. That is also part of effective communication, because if you're saying something and nobody is hearing it, then there will be a problem into it. So effective communication, the feedback has to be very proper into it. Now, for this effective communication, as I was saying, the source and the sender have to be very clear. There are various principles for effective communication which have to be kept in mind. First of all, the principle of understanding. Communication must be such that it transmits understanding of communicated message to the recipient as per the intentions of the sender. A practical application of this principle requires that message must be clearly expressed, whether orally or in written form. That is why we say choose your words very properly, because what you are speaking or what you are writing is going to convey what you mean to convey. The message must be complete, leaving no scope for any doubt likely to confuse the recipient and compelling him towards misinterpretation of the message. Because many times we have seen, sometimes the leaders, the film stars give some ambiguous message. Now, the reporters, they interpret it in various ways, and we see that message has been conveyed in various forms, not actually what was meant to be. So, principle of understanding just conveys that understanding of the communicated message should be very clear for both sender and receiver. Then there is another principle of attention. Communication must be in such a manner that it invites attention of recipients. Now, here it is very important that both verbal and non-verbal communication should be taken into consideration. Many times while we are talking or while we are speaking, we say, this is important, and we say it with a assertive note into our language, or we may just put it in bold while we are writing in written form. We put it in bold or underline something. That means this is important, please pay attention into this. So while we are talking of communication, if anything we have to highlight, or if anything we have to express in a very important note, then we should either put emphasis into it. This emphasis can be both verbal or non-verbal. For practical application of this principle, that is principle of attention, it is imperative that not only message must be expressed in pleasant and sound manner, but also the purpose of the sender in making communication must all be absolutely clarified. We say, pay attention, ये एक आवश्यक सूचना है. We say that, or we say, this is important, or if the caption comes, this is dangerous, we put a red light into it. So colors can be used, symbols can be used if we have to pay attention to something, or we have to signify that this is something which requires a careful consideration. Principle of brevity. That means while you are trying to communicate something, it must be as brief and concise as possible. Not that you just have to cut down onto words, but it means if you are explaining something which can be done in 10 or 15 minutes, then don't just linger on into it. This message which has to be communicated should see that what time is going into it. A single piece of communication should be very clear, it should be concise, it should use important lines, it should use important symbols if we have to them. Brevity of the message must not sort at the cost of clarity or competence of the message. It should not be there. It does not mean that if you are making the message short, you have to make it confusing. You have to use exact amount of words, you have to use exact amount of sentences which are required, but then it should not be just lengthy just for making the communication long. So many times we have people who just talk very little, but they are able to convey their message very soundly to the people who are listening. In other case, we have people who keep on talking for a long time, but they are not able to convey what they want to say. That is the importance of effective communication, that you must see what you are going to communicate takes exact time and exact words and exact expressions which are there. The sender must strike balance among the factors, that is brevity, clarity and completeness. No message should be incomplete. While we are saying ambiguous message leads to various sort of interpretation which are not required. So that is important while we are saying of messages. Principle of timeliness. As we said, the message should be brief, it should be complete, it should not be ambiguous without deciphering or without changing its meaning. So it also says that communication must be timely, that is right time. Many times we say you've done a good work when the work has already been done and the person who has done the work has lost interest in that work. That is not right. We say that reinforcement should be given immediately. If a person has done something good, then tell him immediately or convey to him that yes, your work was very good. We have examples, we have movies which flopped when they were first released, and after a gap of 10-15 years when they are released again, people are just going and flocking and seeing them. So this is what it is, that time when the movie was made and released, probably it was ahead of times and people did not understand the message it was communicating. Similarly goes with books, similarly goes with people who are actually ahead of time. So that is very important, that when you see your audience, what sort of audience it is, you must communicate exactly as you are saying. So the principle of timeliness is very important. That is, when we need to communicate to the recipient, we must see that when he is ready or when he is in that mode of receiving, we must communicate this. And advanced communication carries with it the danger of forgetting. Suppose we have to tell somebody to do the work tomorrow and we tell him a week before, then what will happen? Probably that message or that information which he had got might just be lost in other sorts of work. So timeliness is very important. When you want to get what you want to get, when you expect, that is to be kept in mind. Principle of appropriateness and rationality is another very important part of communication. Communication must be appropriate or rational in the context of realization of its objectives. Communication must neither be impractical to act upon nor be irrational, making no contribution to common objectives. So while you are communicating, don't put in lofty goals for people, or don't give lofty ideas to people. Be practical, be what is required, because everyone understands that what is appropriate for what time is needed. Principle of feedback, which communication, as we are again and again saying, communication is a two-way process. The feedback or the response is very important for effective communication. The sender must know how much he has been able to convey to the recipient, or what the recipient has actually understood. The recipient's message must be easily transferable to the sender, as the original communication was done by the sender. So that cycle should complete: sender, receiver, receiver, sender. And if there is any breakage in that cycle, then the communication is not purposeful and it is not effective. The idea behind emphasizing on feedback aspect of communication is that it helps the sender to modify his or her subsequent communication in view of the reactions of the recipient, making for better and improved human relations. Principle of constructive and strategic use of informal groups. This is also very important for effective communication. It is many times the constructive and groups which are informally made actually make speedier communication. As I was giving example, that grapevine communication in organization actually makes things move faster many times than the formal communication. The management thus must not hesitate in making a constructive and strategic use of informal groups for ensuring and facilitating speedier communication in emergency situation. Such a use of informal groups would also help to develop good human relations by upgrading the status of informal groups and their ladders. So that is why we say this is there. Just referring to this, we can also say how classroom communication can be made effective, although this is part of the learners when they are in classroom. Just to keep in mind that in classroom also you can have effective communication just by keeping the principle of effective communication in mind. Certain settings may differ, so there is principle of competency, that the a person who is the source first must be competent with the information he has. It should be authentic, it should be valid, it should be reliable. Then suitability of content, which depends upon who is the recipient. That is very important. Principle of focus, that we must, whenever we go into classroom setting, it many times also leads to office meeting settings. Whenever we go, first of all, we must try to catch the attention of the learners. This can be done by either citing an incident, citing an example, showing some movies, showing some interesting material that can be done. So that is very important, that you have to gain focus of the individuals or the learners who are there in your either boardroom setting or the classroom setting. Principle of using effective strategies. There are various sort of strategies. When we say there is questioning, there is brainstorming, there is focus group discussion, there is a narration. So these we have to see, and we have to focus when is what important while communicating effectively. Lastly, we have to see that principle of feedback and reinforcement. We had earlier also said that cycle has to be complete. If the cycle has to be complete, then we have to see that we are able to give proper feedback at the right time. we should get the proper feedback, and also we should give the proper feedback. Lastly, it was said while we were referring earlier that timeliness is very important. If a person has done some good work, he has presented some good thing, and after 2 days we say that presentation was good, it does not give the actual effort that it should be given. So, in feedback and reinforcement should be as quick as possible. If we keep all these things in mind, then our communication becomes more sound, it becomes more effective, and we have to see that noises in our communication cycle are removed for effective communication. With this, we will move to the principles of readiness in effective communication. That principle of readiness, that we were saying feedback is ready, then the learner should be ready to receive the message. The principle of sharing and interacting, the learners in the classroom or boardroom should be made in pairs so that they are able to share their information with each other, give feedback. It can be a cyclic way where a wheel sort of, the source is in the middle and then the recipient are interacting with the source and also with the wheels. So that is important. Then pupil centeredness, we must take care of who are there in our classroom setting, or if we say it in a meeting setting, then who are our audience, that must be keep in mind. And there should be a mutual understanding between the source and the recipient if the communication has to be effective, either in classroom or in our day-to-day life. So, if effective communication has to be there, we have to keep the principles of communication in mind, that we have to be very clear with what message we are conveying. The message should have equal amount of words, the message should be appropriate, there should be focus, both verbal and non-verbal, on the things which are important and not important. We can use colors, we can use symbols to emphasize on the things which we have to convey. And while we are talking of classrooms, we have to see that our recipient should be ready to receive what we want to convey. That is in case of every communication. If the person who you want to communicate is not ready to listen, if he has not opened his mental setup, his ears, his senses, then the communication can never be successful, it can never be effective. So, for effective communication, it is important that we make our learner ready to receive, we make him to be focused on what we have to say. It can be our gestural emphasis, it can be our verbal emphasis, or it can be various sort of medias which we use. So, it is very important to effectively communicate what we want to others in this 21st century world. With this, thank you very much for listening to this effective communication lecture.